Hi guys, it's Claire. Welcome back. It has been a while since I last posted, and so I hope you have all been doing well and having a good fall or spring, depending on what hemisphere you're in. The last few months over here have been quite busy and hectic and in many ways very full, but I also spent a lot of the fall feeling quite low. And so September, October, and November kind of felt like the days were either sort of slipping by uncontrollably or dragging out into kind of empty, wasted time. So it hasn't been like the best of times, but I do think that I'm on a bit of an upswing and good things have been happening in a more general sense. I moved apartments at the end of the summer and am really loving my new space. So that has been really wonderful. And I have also been reading some books this fall that have brought different kinds of, comfort or escape or illumination of some variety. And so I thought I would sit down and share some of my favorite books of the fall and also touch on some less favorite books of the fall. Although most of the books that I have here are books that I would recommend, some of them very highly. And then I think the one that I felt most ambivalent about is a book that you have probably heard about and probably have an opinion on. And so I will leave that one for the end, and I will start off instead with my favorite book of the last few months, which is Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. And shout out to my friend Carrie for recommending this one to me, because while I think that this one got kind of a fair amount or even quite a bit of buzz and reviews in Australia and the UK, I don't think it made any splash over here at all. I certainly hadn't seen any coverage or buzz about it whatsoever until Carrie put it on my radar. And I'm so glad that she did, because it really ended up kind of knocking my socks off. It's one of those books that you think is going to be a kind of comfort read, an early morning riser, if you will. And so, you're going along having a nice cozy time of it, and then you realize at some point that you've actually been stabbed and are now bleeding inwardly. That at least was my experience of being emotionally bamboozled by this book. This novel follows a 40-year-old English woman named Martha, and it opens with the end of her 8-year marriage to a man named Patrick. And from there, the narrative circles back to Martha's childhood and adolescence, which is when she first meets Patrick, and also when, as she says, quote, a little bomb went off in my brain, which is her euphemism for the mental illness that comes to dominate much of her life, and particularly the narrative that she tells herself about her life and who she is as a person. And I should say too that Martha's characterization of her illness as a little bomb is a kind of wonderful and devastating bit of phrasing, because it acknowledges the enormity of what she's struggling with while also kind of undercutting and understating it in a way that is very typical of Martha's narration throughout, which is often shrugging and ironic in a very British kind of way, while also in certain moments being painfully earnest and honest. And I think it would be very easy to talk about this book in a very buzzwordy kind of way and describe it as, a meditation on marriage and motherhood and mental illness, which is not wrong, but is a bit deadening and also doesn't really get at the true heart of this book and the way that it just leaves you feeling emotionally battered while also somehow more whole. And actually what comes to mind now when I think about this book is the character of Martha and the wit and humor of her narration and the ways in which it allows you to empathize with her even in her lowest, most self-sabotaging and at times quite loathsome moments. I also think about the wonderful secondary characters that populate this book, like Martha's failed poet of a father, or her uptight Aunt Winsome, or her eccentric best friend Peregrine, all of whom add a real warmth and familial comfort to this book, even when Martha is at her most isolated. And collectively, they do really feel like the supporting cast of the best kind of indie British rom-com, like the Hugh Grant ones from the 90s. And I would also say that the relationship between Martha and her younger sister Ingrid is especially great and feels really lived in, just in all of the ways that they kind of communicate and banter with each other. It reminded me a lot actually of the sister relationship at the center of the show This Way Up, which in the US is on Hulu and is also about mental illness. So yes, this is a book about marriage and motherhood and mental illness, and the way that it depicts the latter in particular is really great and feels both incredibly specific to Martha while also leaving room for the reader to interpret and project themselves onto her if they want to. And then the last thing I also wanted to say about Sorrow and Bliss is that underneath it all, this is also a book about how people often love each other insufficiently, and how on the flip side, people are often not able to accept the love that other people are able to give them. And it's about how sometimes as you get older and live a little bit more life, if you're lucky, you are able to get to a place where you can recognize gestures of love for what they are and accept them for what they are, even if in the past they wouldn't have felt like they were enough. It's a subtler theme of the book, I suppose, but I think that Martha's relationship with her Aunt Winsome in particular is very emblematic of that kind of shift that happens throughout life. And it was really one of the many aspects of this book that just made the whole reading experience feel like a very surprising but much needed balm for the soul. Next up, a book that provided some much needed escape this fall was The Lions of Alverson by Guy Gavriel Kay. This is my second Guy Gavriel Kay after reading A Brightness Long Ago earlier this year and absolutely loving it. And while I think it will be hard to top that one in terms of my GGK rankings, I did really enjoy The Lions of Alverson. This book is set in the same kind of alternate universe, slightly skewed version of Europe as A Brightness Long Ago, but where A Brightness Long Ago focused on Renaissance Italy, The Lions of Alverson takes place a few hundred years earlier and farther west in Al-RASSAN, which is a stand-in for Al-Andalus or Muslim Spain during the Middle Ages. And the novel takes place at a moment when the Jadites, aka the Christians in the north, are looking to move south to reconquer the territory controlled by the Asherites, aka the Muslims in Al-RASSAN. And so this is Guy Gavriel Kay's interpretation of the Christian reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula. And the novel follows three central characters, each of whom represent one of the three main religions of the region. Rodrigo is a Jadite commander, Amar is an Asherite poet and assassin and political mastermind, kind of jack of all trades, and Jahan is a female physician and member of the Kindoth faith, which is the stand-in for Judaism in this world. And in almost every way, this book is much more ambitious than A Brightness Long Ago in terms of the ideological scope and the cast of characters, the tangled politics of it all, and also just in terms of this grand inflection point in history that Kay is trying to capture. And there are times where I wish he had given himself a little bit more space to kind of work all of that out, particularly when it came to developing various character arcs and also when it came to building up certain relationships, particularly the relationship between Jahan and the two central heroes, because her feelings towards Rodrigo and Amar and the kind of shifts in those feelings did not always make complete sense to me. And then I also wish he had similarly given himself a little bit more space to put meat on the relationship between Rodrigo and Amar themselves, because in many ways they are two sides of the same coin, and I thought what Kay was trying to do with that was super fascinating and often quite moving, but I just wish there had been more of it so that the kind of emotional payoff of it all hit me even harder than it did. I felt like I had to do a little bit of embellishment in my own head to feel the full resonance of all of that. That being said, a lot of what I loved about A Brightness Long Ago was present in the Lions of Alverson. Lions is just a much earlier Kay book, and so you can kind of see the ways in which he is still honing and perfecting some of his best kind of narrative techniques and tools and inclinations, but it still very much has his kind of interest in the arc of history and the people who shape it. It has his love of legends and stories and the ways in which they are passed down and travel across space and time to kind of form our understanding of ourselves. It has his fantastic world building, and particularly the way that he incorporates ideology and culture into that world building. And it also still has his beautiful writing and his wonderful ability to evoke a sense of the epic and the emotional epic, if that makes sense, through both words and language and also really memorable images as well. And yeah, so even though this book didn't feel quite as perfect or tightly controlled as A Brightness Long Ago, I did really enjoy it, and while I was reading it, I ordered 2 more Guy Gavriel Kay books, so I now have Sailing to Sarantium and A Song for Arbonne on my TBR to dive into next, although I would love to hear anyone else's thoughts if you are a Guy Gavriel Kay fan about what to read next or which of those 2 books you prefer, and just general thoughts on Kay, because I know that The Lions of Alverson is a lot of people's favorite of his, so definitely drop some thoughts down below if you have any. And then another great book I read this fall was Tales from the Haunted South, Dark Tourism and Memories of Slavery from the Civil War Era by Tiya Miles, who coincidentally just won the National Book Award for Nonfiction for All That She Carried. This book was published in 2015 when Tiya Miles was a professor at the University of Michigan and became fascinated with the phenomenon of ghost tours and dark tourism, and particularly how those things play out in the Deep South in America. And so she ends up traveling to various hot spots in the haunted South, places like Savannah and Charleston and New Orleans, and also the kind of backcountry Louisiana plantations. And she discovers that quite often the central characters and figures in these stories are the ghosts of enslaved Black men and women from the antebellum period. And she ends up focusing on 3 popular ghost stories in particular as a means of examining why these narratives are so popular and what Southern ghost tourism tells us about our modern relationship with the past, and particularly with the traumas of the past and the traumas, in this case, of slavery in the South. And it's just a really well-written book with really thought-provoking analysis and close reading. And although it focuses on a seemingly kind of specific, niche, narrow topic, Tiya Miles does, I think, a great job of kind of pulling back and really looking at and interrogating the broader implications of dark tourism and how we as a culture have invented these histories and distorted real history as a means of both protecting ourselves from the true and troubling realities of the past, and also as a means of avoiding a true reckoning with that past. So just to give you a sense of some of the thrust of the book and also Tiya Miles' wonderful writing, here is a quick passage from the conclusion of the book. Rather than finding an opportunity to learn about the antebellum past, to empathize with enslaved human beings, or to connect with a rich though troubled regional and national heritage, tourists encounter narratives that temper the history of slavery and race relations, assuage guilt, and feed fascination with the racialized other. The use of slaves' lives, likenesses, and experiences for the grist of this economic enterprise seem to amount to a virtual recommodification and recommercialization of Black bodies in the modern moment. So another wonderful read that I highly recommend if you are feeling some meatier nonfiction, although the book itself is fairly short. And then I have 2 books that I enjoyed, though in a more fleeting, forgettable kind of way. The first of those is Maybe You Should Talk to to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, which is a memoir, self-help-ish book about a therapist, her patients, and her therapist. And I really enjoyed this. Lori Gottlieb writes with a great deal of clarity and is really able to effectively distill some fundamental insights and truths about therapy and the practice of therapy in a way that kind of makes you feel like you're getting free therapy just by reading the book. So that was nice. That being said, what stuck with me the most about this book were the stories of the individual patients that she chronicles throughout the book, particularly the story of John, who at the start of the book is kind of a flaming asshole and just an insufferable person. And I also really loved the story of Rita, who is an older woman who is really seemingly at a kind of rock bottom, depths of despair kind of place in life. And Lori Gottlieb writes their stories in a way that makes this book kind of surprisingly a page turner. It's not like a mystery book, obviously, but it almost has that quality in that you are kind of wanting to find out more about these people and to see what kinds of things they're going to reveal about themselves, what kind of breakthroughs they may or may not have, and also just where they're going to end up at the end of all of this. So yeah, it was ultimately quite riveting and a very fast read, and I also did cry a couple of times. And then I also really enjoyed The Love Hypothesis by Hazelwood, which at this point is just the kind of publishing phenomenon success story that you just have to smile at. You know, like this popular AU Raylo fan fiction gets traditionally published as a contemporary romance novel and doesn't try to hide its origins, but instead leans into the fan fiction of it all, even putting fanfic art on the cover and unapologetically naming the hero Adam. Like, hats off to you, Hazelwood, and hats off to your publishers at Berkeley, and also I guess to the people of TikTok. At the time of filming, 3 months after publication, it has almost 140,000 ratings on Goodreads, and it has also been on the New York Times paperback bestseller list for weeks. And so yeah, it has just been fun to watch this book kind of do its thing and go and go and go. Who would have thought, you know? Wattpad and AO3, that's who. I read this book on NetGalley right before it was published, and I had it on my Kindle for months and did end up picking it up once I heard that it was a Raylo fanfic, just because I was incredibly intrigued. And I was shocked and tickled by the fact that this book really is not trying at all to hide the fact that it is a Star Wars fanfiction. It's an alternate universe Rey Kylo Ren romance in which Rey is Olive and Kylo Ren is Adam, and it is an academia grad school romance set in the Stanford biology department. Olive is a PhD student and Adam is a brilliant, talented, young, but widely hated professor. And pretty much all the other characters in the book are also easily identifiable as their Star Wars counterparts, including Finn and Poe and Rose. And I really enjoyed the setting of this book. I enjoyed the banter between Adam and Olive. I will say that it has hardcore fan fiction vibes, just in the sense that the kiss that kind of kicks off the whole fake dating trope of the book, and then also other plot and relationship developments, feel even more sometimes forced and contrived and unbelievable than your typical romance novel. But you know, it's fine and it's fun if you are game to buy into it. Although the Adam character does at times feel a bit weirdly intense if you are not familiar with Adam Driver's portrayal of Kylo Ren. So if you read this book and didn't know that it was a Star Wars fan fiction, or weren't familiar with the Kylo Ren Rey Star Wars trilogy, I would be fascinated to know what you thought about this book. And lastly, months ago, I did read Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney, back when the discourse still cared about this book. And you know, it was fine. I imagine that in the years to come, people might look back on this book as, you know, a novel where she was experimenting or trying to do something different or whatever. The novel follows 4 characters, Alice, Eileen, Felix, and Simon, all of whom are Irish and in their late 20s or early to mid 30s, although they all act and have the emotional bandwidth of much younger people, so that part of it felt a bit exhausting. But as with Sally Rooney's other novels, this one is very much concerned with the love and sex lives of these characters. But unlike other Rooney novels, this one is interspersed with these long-winded, often inane email exchanges between Alice and Eileen, which tested the limits of my patience and also felt about as deep to me as any standard group text thread where people are sending each other Wikipedia articles that they have read and are now thinking about too deeply as it relates to their own climate anxiety, and just other stuff like that that I don't think needs to be in a Sally Rooney novel, particularly because I don't think it is the best vessel for or example of Sally Rooney's true talents, which to me is not having pretty much the same social and political opinions as many white left-leaning liberal people, but is instead her incredible ability to capture all of the nuances and complexities and anxieties and performativity of those interpersonal relationships. You can just feel the effort in this book in a way that you don't in Conversations with Friends or Normal People, and in a way that made reading this book feel uncharacteristically labored for a Sally Rooney book, at least until this magical moment when you have about 90 pages left of the book where she finally puts all four of these characters together in one place and dispenses with the construct of the email exchanges and just lets these characters bounce off each other like pinballs. It is just a wonderful moment where she clearly slips back into what she's best at and what seems to come most naturally for her. And so while I totally understand her needing to try something different in this book, I do hope in my heart of hearts that in future books she continues to write the kind of books that she's good at. And the last thing I did want to mention, and this is a major spoiler alert, is that I have in the past argued that Sally Rooney is a very literary romance novelist, or that she could be one if she didn't resist it so much. And so I just wanted to take a moment to say how shocked and vindicated I felt by the epilogue of this book, which is an honest to God romance novel epilogue, pregnancy announcement and all, and I just genuinely could not believe that she included that. I honestly thought I was being punked, but you know, maybe it is just evidence that deep down Sally Rooney does know that she is our great millennial literary romance novelist. I was just not expecting her to confirm my thesis in such a flagrant and genre-specific way. So all that's to say that while Beautiful World, Where Are You was a disappointment of sorts, I guess, I am excited to see what Sally Rooney does from here, and hopefully there will maybe be a little bit less scrutiny on her in the future so that she can just do what she's good at. Those are some of the books that I have been reading this fall. I hope to be back at you soon with another video, hopefully not 3 months from now. But please let me know what you have been reading and loving this fall, and anything that you are hoping or trying to get to before the end of the year. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!